This is Jeff Standridge, and this is the Innovation Junkies podcast. If you want to drastically improve your business, learn proven growth strategies, and generate sustained results for your organization, you've come to the right place. Over the next half hour, we're going to be sharing specific strategies, tactics, and tips that you can use to grow your business, no matter the size, no matter the industry, and no matter the geography. Weekly, we'll bring in a top mover and shaker, someone who's done something unbelievable with his or her business, and we'll dig deep. We'll uncover specific strategies, tactics, and tools that they've used to help you achieve your business goals. Welcome to the Innovation Junkies podcast.
Hey guys, if you're looking to put your business on the fast track to achieving sustained strategic growth, this episode is sponsored by the team at Innovation Junkie. To learn more about our Growth DX, go to innovationjunkie.com/growthdx. Now let's get on with the show.
Hey guys, Jeff Standridge here, and welcome to the Innovation Junkies podcast. How you doing?
Hey, Jeff Amaron as well. I can't believe we're on for another great episode. It's going to be fantastic today.
How are you today?
You know, I'm doing really well. It's a sunny day outside. It's going to be about 147 degrees. What else? What else could you want?
I cooked my eggs on the sidewalk this morning.
Exactly.
Man, it's crazy.
But today we're fortunate to have a really fantastic guest on. You want me to tell you a little bit about her?
Let's hear about her.
Okay, so today we've got Nora Herting on. She is the founding CEO at ImageThink. She's recognized as the world's #1 leader in visual leadership expertise. She's also exhibited internationally as an artist. She's worked with some of the world's biggest brands like IBM, Google, NASA, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Toyota. And she's been on a whole variety of different network and cable TV shows as a recognized expert in visual leadership. We are just so lucky to have Nora Herting with us today.
Hey, Nora.
Hi. Good morning.
Great to have you with us today.
Yeah, great to be here.
We're going to get started with something completely unrelated to innovation, strategy, or leadership, but it's crucially important to the success of the rest of the podcast. And that is, what was your first car that you ever owned?
Oh, you're really making me go to a dark place there, because it was a Honda Accord. I think it was in 1993, which was not a new car at all. I was in college. I think they really saw me coming. I went and bought the car from a used car lot by myself. And later in the day, I drove up to take my dad and my sister for a ride, and the clutch completely fell out of the car. The AC worked when I test drove it, never worked again. The radio never worked again. I think in the time I had it, it was parked on the street. It got hit like randomly at least a couple of times, with the driver driving off. So was happy to get rid of that car. Eventually, I think I sold it. It wasn't even, moving out of my driveway. I think I got rid of it for $500. What about you?
Jeff, you go. I've got a good one, but I'm sure you got one too.
When I was 13, I wanted to buy a motorcycle because in the state of Arkansas, at 14, you could get a motorcycle license for a certain size of motorcycle, as long as it wasn't over a certain size. And my dad said, "Jeff, don't do that. I know a car you can buy for." I'd saved up about $700 from mowing grass and doing other kinds of odd jobs, and so I bought a 1950 model Ford car, and then spent the next 3 years restoring it with my dad before I turned 16. And so that was my first automobile, followed very closely by a 1969 Ford pickup, because in Arkansas, you got to have a pickup when you first start driving. You got to have a pickup, and so I had 50 model Ford, 69 Ford car, and pickup both.
And you had lawn chairs for the back of it for the.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you put 2 lawn chairs behind the cab.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I needed to hang out with your dad. I mean, that sounds like an awesome experience.
It was a great experience. We did everything on that car except the upholstery. We did all the body work, all the painting. We just taught ourselves. Put a new another transmission in it, and I can't even work on automobiles today. They're too advanced for me. So, but that was it.
I have lots of doom and gloom car stories that were first or near first. I grew up actually driving a Toyota pickup truck. standard transmission. I took my driving lesson in a teal green 1978 Buick LeSabre that had teal green interior. Apparently that was a thing in the late 1970s. But the first car I ever owned was a blue Toyota pickup truck. And it was washed away in a flood in Wyoming, interestingly enough, after I'd had it for all of about 2 years. But that was it. I was a pickup driving man in those days.
There you go. There you go. Well, Nora,
I got my license in a 1978 Ford LTD, which was so big for me. I was about 90 pounds, but it was, the interior was like a sort of red velvet kind of.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
The 70s is, I don't know. I think a lot of the 70s design work was LSD induced because there were colors that should never have gone together in vehicles. But anyway.
Watch out, because I'm predicting that the 70s is going to be coming back, Jeff. It's going to be
great.
Coming back.
I've got a pair of bell bottoms. I'm just dying to get back into.
I'm wearing them right now. You just can't tell.
Well, Nora, let's talk about you. We've talked about cars. Let's talk about you. Tell us about yourself and maybe a little bit about your journey and how you came to be where you are today, the #1 visual leadership expert.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, apparently my favorite toy when I was 9 months old was a paper and a pen. I wasn't a stenographer, but I drew a lot. So it was something that I came to really naturally. I had intended to become an academic. I got a degree, 2 degrees in fine art, actually. And I think that, largely that was because in school I was first generation to college, and there wasn't a lot of practical career options for people studying art. So the tenure, professorship, the health insurance, all of that, I think seemed like the way to go. And it's not easy to get a position, but I did pretty early out of school. And then after about 4 or 5 months, I had this terrible, I don't know if you have ever had this experience where like the thing you've been working for, you get it. And then you're like, why was I trying to do this? And I had this moment where I thought, okay, this goal I had, for the last 8+ years is really just a failure of imagination on my part, about what else I could do with my skill set. And so I left that. It was a private college, and I was getting ready to move to New York. No job, no plan. And before I left, I went home to see my mother. We went out to dinner at this diner. And while we're eating, she says, Nora, so when you get to New York, are you going to get a job at an art firm? And I was like, an art firm, Mom? She's like, yeah, an art firm. Yeah, see, you guys, I can hear you guys laughing. That was me. I said, well, Mom, tell me about this art firm. She says, well, there's all of these artists and they work for a company and they go to an office and they make art for other companies. And she pauses because she sees my face. She's like, Nora, like a law firm, but for artists, an art firm. And at this point, she's so sincere about it that it's no longer funny to me, because I have to break the news to her that there's no art firm waiting to hire me with my master's degree. And so she gets real quiet. She's like, it doesn't exist. I said, no. This look of like terror comes across her face, and she says, well, then Nora, what are you going to do? And I felt awful because I was, their first kid. I had 2 degrees that they didn't have. And I think she was terrified that I was going to starve to death, And I can't say that I wasn't a little concerned myself when I moved to New York. So, I'd love to sit there and say, okay, well, at that diner, guys, I conceived Image Think in my mind, and then I just went out and made it happen. But that's not really the case. I forgot about that conversation for years and years. And one day I walked into the Image Think offices in Brooklyn. I looked around and saw all of my employees, most of which have an art degree, working on, visualizing strategies, brainstorming sessions, et cetera, for our clients. And I thought, oh my God, I guess here's the art firm, but that was not a direct line from that diner to the reality.
Well, let's talk about Image Think. What do you guys do today? And you talk about the Image Think method. Help our listeners understand a little more about the company.
Yeah. So what Image Think does is we really use the power of visuals and visual thinking, but for leadership. So I call it visual leadership, to help companies move from, the first phase of maybe brainstorming a project or thinking big, all the way to, strategy and planning so they can execute that, using visuals as a way to help bring people along, to help give clarity to conversations, to help messaging for leaders about directions that their company is headed, and cut through a lot of complex strategy and problems. So we do that with a variety of visual tools. Sometimes that looks like our people in the room, or these days virtually, listening and synthesizing all the conversations into words and pictures. So the group can literally see and get on the same page and leave with a vision of where they're going.
So help us kind of operationalize that. Jeff and I spend a lot of time doing strategic growth planning for organizations that are in the, call it $50 to $500 million range. Talk us through how Image Think would work with a process like that.
Sure. So a recent project, and we have a lot of tech and healthcare clients, but this client is actually a global nonprofit for women's health that I'm thinking about. We've helped recently. They have a new president. They didn't have the last strategic planning session was 5 years before. Apparently, it didn't go smoothly. The new president wanted to have a bigger vision, bigger mission, kind of widen it. She had to get the board, on board, and the rest of the organization. So we designed a session where first they looked at the mission. We helped them kind of think through that visually. What does that look like? What does the future look like? Where are we going? Right. And then once they kind of all aligned on that, we started talking about where are we now and how do we work backwards to get there, which is probably, a technique that you all do as well. But we're visually charting that as it happens. So at the end of the 2-day session, one of the most powerful documents they had was a literal visual roadmap reflecting their new mission, the new future, how it's going to benefit all the constituents that they have, and the strategic path forward by different work streams. So the president can now go and socialize this to the board, to donors, et cetera, to not just tell them, but show them this is where we are now. This is where we want the future to be, and here is our strategic map to get there.
Hey folks, we'll be right back with the episode. But first, we want to tell you about a limited opportunity to take advantage of our Growth DX. For a limited time, we're offering a free strategy call to see whether our unique diagnostic tool is right for you. Go to innovationjunkie.com/growthdx to learn more. I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question on some of the use of visuals. What's the research behind cognitive learning through visualization versus words versus auditory? Is there some kind of really good basis in the research that says this is going to stick more or be more compelling? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my sister's a neuroscientist. She's got a lab at the University of Southern California. So she keeps me really honest about how you can extrapolate on some of the statistics. But there's been a statistic that's floated around there for a long time about 80% of people being visual learners. Where that comes from, I can't quite say, but what I can say from a neuroscience perspective is this idea of like being right brain, left brain, where if you're right-handed like me, you're kind of sad because apparently you're just not as creative as all the people who use their left hand. That's not really true. And when you're using visuals, you're actually using multiple parts of the brain, from the basic like occipital lobe where you process the visual, through the centers where you identify it as language, you categorize it, all the way to the prefrontal cortex, right? Which we know is the sense of higher thinking. It's, what separates us from apes and all that good stuff. So if you want to approach a problem differently and you want to try to neurologically engage as much of your brain matter as possible, there's an argument that doing it visually in addition to just auditorily, you're actually using more parts of your brain. And the most of our brain is actually attributed to processing images because of that, because it's actually multiple regions that are happening. What's fascinating is they did a study with folks where they put them in an MRI and they didn't actually draw. They just asked them to think about drawing or think about an image as it was being drawn. And they had the same neurological activity as someone who was actually making the drawing. So I think that that's part of the benefit for folks in a room with us, even if they're not the ones making the visual, they're watching it, they're thinking that way. And neurologically, that's mirror neurons, they're having the same experience and the same benefit.
Tell us a little bit about your sales process when you're selling to a CEO of an organization who's probably relatively experienced in very traditional strategic planning, 3-ring binders, lots of paper, goes and sits on a shelf for 11 months until they pull it out and say, let's see how we did. How do you sell your services to a CEO or to a leader who's kind of traditionally focused on those approaches?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that the leaders that we work with are listening to this podcast. They're innovation junkies. They're people who are constantly looking for ways to approach leadership or innovation differently than it's been done before. They are looking to have a different experience for their executives or the people who are going to be in the session thinking and planning with them. And they typically are from industries where innovation and collaboration are critical. If you think about technology or healthcare, it's all about your IP, right? Maybe it's the power of your AI or algorithm. If you're Google, if you're Pfizer, it's your molecule, right? So we find that leaders in those spaces with that mindset are really open and interested in taking this approach. And it's, we started in 2009, and I can tell you that there's been kind of a long tail effect. So at the beginning, it was, more innovative companies in that space. And as time has gone on, it's great because now we work with some industries, like I was just talking about, a nonprofit sector that isn't necessarily follow maybe some of those characteristics, but I think there's a sea change, and this is something that people are more interested in and see the power of.
How did you find yourself founding a firm? I mean, taking an art degree or a couple of art degrees, being an artist, and saying, this is how I'm going to make money from my art. This is how I'm going to create a company around my art. I know you talked about the story with your mother, but how did Image Think come to be, and what vision did you have that created that?
Yeah, well, I don't know how you all feel. I think that sometimes there's a real mythos around founders and whatnot, that it's, the whole idea is like born whole in your mind. And maybe for some people that's the case. But for me, one of our values at Image Think is looking while leaping, which kind of goes back to taking risk and seeing the potential in something, and then, having to kind of go for it, but in a way that you first kind of look around and see what's available, make sure that you're going to land on the other side, not fall down the canyon. So I happened to fall in with a group at Cognizant, at Capgemini, that had been owned by Ernst & Young. And in 2006, they didn't use the word design thinking, but they basically had licensed this methodology that was like design thinking, and had built physically these collaboration spaces in different places all over the world that were full of whiteboards and movable furniture and, games and toys. And I worked with a network of people where we would basically say to, the big clients they brought through, British Petroleum or the US Army, or people who were working on, maybe 5-year strategic initiatives, a lot of IT transformation, that we could get 90 days out of work from them in 3 days. So I really cut my teeth there. I learned the graphic recording, which is kind of the name of the craft of like the live visual synthesis. And then in 2009, when everybody kind of, the world in New York kind of turned upside down a bit, went out on my own, and by luck was given NASA as a client from someone else. So that was one of our first engagements. And then it just went from there,
Let me follow up on that a little bit. So, and it really gets to the team and how you've crafted the team and put together. So I gather you have a highly creative staff. Many of them have an art background and whatnot. You go to a client like NASA, where you've got engineers, scientists, and people that may be wired completely different than folks with an art background. How does that work in strategy process, that kind of alignment between people that can tend to be kind of point A to point B thinkers versus those people that may look at the world a little differently? Talk about your process a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And we do work with a lot of folks like that. And I think that there's a lot of appreciation in a way. I mean, the particular session with NASA was internal, right? NASA doesn't necessarily have customers, if you think about it, right? I guess it's the American people. But for other clients that have, a lot of engineering background, a lot of technical thinkers, a lot of times they're being asked as leaders to articulate the value of the product that they have, or the power of it to potential clients. And they tend to get, and everyone's like this. I mean, we are like this too, I'm sure, in our own fields. They get really in the weeds around, the how and the what. And they're not necessarily able to ladder it up and simplify and talk about the why. And so that is in those environments, a real skill that we bring, because we're simplifying their ideas in a way that makes it more accessible to other people, where they can step back and sort of see the bigger picture that they need to tell to connect with other people. In the NASA session, though, Jeff, it reminds me, one guy did come up to me. He was like, I've been watching you for 2 days, and I'm so fascinated, but I have a suggestion for you. What you need to do is you need to be ambidextrous, so that you're writing with your right hand and your left hand at the same time, so you can be twice as effective. And he was so convinced that this was the way to go that I actually felt compelled to try it, which was, a brilliant, maybe a more brilliant person than me could do that. I have met a few people who can basically write and with both hands at the same time. But for me, it was an utter disaster, because I'm not just drawing, I'm listening to what's being said. I'm synthesizing it for the big ideas. Really, the visual part is the least complex of the process. But clearly this guy was a NASA engineer and a brilliant man, and was sitting studying this and had figured out a way, to.
He was doing the time and motion. Yeah, it was the time and motion study on you. It was the time and motion study. probably had Frederick Taylor's book right next to his, his computer, and he was like, okay, she can increase productivity by using both.
Well, I had a college professor, organic chemistry professor, who could almost do that. He could write with his right hand on the chalkboard at the time. I'm dating myself. Could write on while he's erasing behind it with his left hand, and so you had to take notes.
I pull that off.
You had to take notes. It's kind of like the thing, I can't
that's
do it.
a great example, though, right? You were asking about, what are the power of visuals? Like the fact that you even remember that. I mean, I'm sure you just graduated college, like last 6 or 7 years, maybe. But, that sticks out in your mind. Still, I was talking to someone else who said that they had a high school teacher that would drop all these diagrams. And they remembered the content from those lessons even now. And I think that's an example of the visuals of being able to really help people resonate. But yeah, it's a great question about the engineers. It's a different way of approaching, but really we're helping them kind of translate some of that complexity in a way that makes it accessible to all the other people that they need to communicate with or work with, whether it's internally or outside the organization.
What have you heard? You talked about your process with the women's health nonprofit. I want you to think about a couple of your best clients, kind of your prototypical best clients. What do they say about you and your organization following that you're really proud of?
Yeah, well, actually, someone just shared one with me yesterday. And this is someone at Salesforce, which is a newer client for us, but we've been supporting a lot of in the last year and a half, and they've been great. Was the person said, this was amazing, is so powerful. I'm going to hang it up. I'm going to print it up and hang it up and look at it every day because it gives me something. It reminds me why I get up in the morning. Because it was a synthesis kind of the work that his team was doing. So I was like, wow, that's what more can you say about that, right? Or we did a session with some leaders at J&J and Janssen who said, why are we doing any of these other strategic planning with all these PowerPoints? Like we could just get rid of a 30-page PowerPoint because we have one visual of our strategy. That's so much more effective and resonates. So that's some of the feedback that we get. But I love reminds me why I get up in the
morning.
Great.
That is great. Well, we probably have some listeners who are potential clients for yours. Tell us what a typical engagement looks like with an organization, say in the multi-million-dollar range in terms of the size of a client.
Yeah, the size of the client, not the size of our engagement. Yeah, I love that too. You mentioned the image think method earlier, and so it sort of depends. We have kind of created after a decade of working we do about 300 sessions a year, so it's thousands of projects. Kind of a system. If you think about it, it's like the life cycle of an idea or initiative. And so clients come to us kind of at different points of that cycle, whether it's the beginning at the innovation stage where they know they need a bigger idea. They've been tasked with coming up with goals or solving a big problem. And we'll work with them there to help make the brainstorm productive, capture it, make sure that it's really, fully holistic conversation and thinking. And then there's sort of a movement around that from there. The next one would be engagement. We just talked about the engineers, right? So any leader, and I'm sure that you work with your strategic planning, is once you have the idea, you have to get other people on board to carry it forth, right? And sometimes this gets skipped, but this is really important. So this is where, the leadership can present their idea. They can get people aligned to see where they fit in together, and that might look like a mission purpose kind of conversation. It might look like, okay, how do we all work together to execute this kind of project? And then the next stage is like that actual strategic planning. So our clients can come to us at any stage, and we first want to understand the objectives. I always ask them, and my folks ask them, what are the 3 words you want people describing at the end of the session, and what will be different in your organization if it goes well. And then we kind of work backwards from there to figure out how we best support it. And then we're in the session, whether that's a virtual session these days or in person. And we keep up. So at the end of the session, all the visuals are completed when people finish talking. And then that becomes a tool, depending on where they are in that kind of image think method, that gets socialized and used as an artifact and as a driver of the work when that workshop or that session is done.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We're talking with Nora Herting, the world's #1 visual leadership expert and the CEO of Image Think. Nora, it's been great having you with us today. You've really stimulated my brain to think differently about some of the work that we do in the area of strategy and strategy development.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Jeff, any follow-on questions?
Yeah, I did have one, and I think it's crucially important. So you've got great clients. You've built this fantastic company, but globally, we're in this war for great talent. How do you attract and retain really great talent that allows you to do the things you do with the clients that you have?
That's a great question, and that's always with a service-based business, and I'm curious how you all have approached this too. Is it your people, right? It's not necessarily the easiest thing to scale. So we really had to kind of move ourselves into thinking about ourselves as a learning organization. When we hired our first sort of visual strategist, there were very few people who even knew that this was a job or had any qualification previously. So we have a pretty unique process for hiring for folks in this role. And then we've developed a training program. Actually, the leader of my team is working on updating it right now. It's pretty robust. So it's usually 2 or 3 months of apprentice kind of style training, shadowing and drills and whatnot to develop them before they're in a position to go out and support any type of client. So it is like talent and skill is definitely very important to us. And the way we've approached it right now is just to put the resources in at the organization level, hire really carefully, because it's a big investment for us to get someone to the level that they need to do the work for, our marquee clients.
Well, Nora, tell our listeners where they can find you and connect with you and your company.
Yeah, so I think I'm still the world's only Nora Herting. If there's another one out there, you guys email me and let me know. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Image Think is ImageThink, IMAGETHINK.net or .com. You can find us either place. And we have a free PDF download of my book, Draw Your Big Idea, on our website. So if your listeners want to check that out, it's basically 108 visual exercises that we do with some of our clients, but for individuals. So it's a good place to start if you want to test this out for yourself and see how it might work for you and your team.
Fantastic. That's Nora Herting at imagethink.net. Nora, thank you for joining us today. It's been great talking with you, and I can't wait to check out your book. This has been another episode of the Innovation Junkies podcast. Thank you for joining.
Hey folks, this is Jeff Amrine. We want to thank you for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate your time. If you're enjoying the Innovation Junkies podcast, please do us a huge favor. Click the subscribe button right now and please leave us a review. It would mean the world to both of us. And don't forget to share us on social media.